Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna K770 Power Cutter. Customer complaint is that it won't start because it doesn't have spark. Well, we'll look into that and see. But the first thing we always look into is the fuel tank, right? It doesn't look great in here. Fuel looks kind of dark. Can't see to the bottom of a tank on one of these. It's just too big of a tank. So we'll get back to that. Let's take the top cover off of here. There's actually three sections. There's that lid I just took off. Then there's this orange section that holds the air filter. And then there's another lower section. But we're looking for the spark plug right now so we can look into the cylinder and see if this is one of the many concrete saws that come across my bench that has a roach cylinder. I mean, these things live under the worst possible conditions. If you don't use water when you're cutting, you're just making all kinds of dust, and it tears these things apart on the inside. So looking at this one, it's got some wear, but these aren't cheap saws. We're going to fix this, and he's going to get some more use out of it. So let's verify that no spark situation that he's talking about. We got a tester on here. Well, I don't know if you could see that or not, but it had spark. I didn't see anything wrong with that at all, actually. So we're going to put this plug back in, and we're going to start looking into the fuel system, because it's always the fuel system, right? Let's dump this stuff out and see what they're running. This is always fun trying to dump these. I don't know why I'm not using my new transfer pump, but I actually do a pretty good job here not making a huge mess on the bench. It looks really dark. Is that because they got a lot of oil in it, or is it because it's old? I mean, I can't even see to the bottom of the funnel, and normally with a regular 40 or 50 to 1 mix, I can see to the bottom. But what goes to the bottom is water, so I'm tapping a little bit of the fuel into this baby jar. And yeah, there's water in there. There's some dirt and debris in there. It's just not pretty at all. Let's take a look at the fuel filter. Yeah, that's pretty bad. So we're going to put a new filter on it. You know, that dark plugged fuel filter is the cause of a lot of these things not running right. Pressure testing the fuel line in the carburetor. Looks like we're holding 10 pounds of pressure. That metal piece that I'm clamping on there now, that's a weight to keep the filter down on the bottom of the tank. We'll just put this cap back on for now till we come back to filling it up with fuel. So now there's 4 screws that hold this lower section on. Our goal now is to get the carburetor off. The primer bulb kind of hangs out through this section, so you're going to want to kind of push the bulb in. And then in the front there was a rubber boot where air comes up from the flywheel that feeds the air filter. We had to remove that from this tray. Now there's 6 of these little nuts. And we're taking them out because if we don't, we're going to be looking for them on the floor. Ask me how I know. And later I'll show you that they go in a certain way. So there's all 6. Now there's a single screw that holds this carburetor assembly in place. I'm blowing the dirt and debris away from the flange that bolts to the cylinder. As soon as we pull that flange away, I don't want anything dropping into the intake port. So here's that single screw. And we just got to kind of, it's kind of a bad setup. That hole in the air filter holder should be a little bit bigger to get that screw through it, but it doesn't go through it. So now I'm kind of peeling the flange away from the cylinder. It's stuck on there a little bit, but it just popped off. Now we can lift the whole air filter tray and carburetor, intake boot. Whole kit and caboodle can come off now. Right now I'm prying the main fuel line off the carburetor. And the throttle linkage is snapped in. This throttle rod is snapped into the plastic link trigger. So there's the flange I'm pointing at. And that flange, it sits down in a cup kind of underneath the intake port right there. So when we put it back together, we got to drop that flange into that cup and then roll it ahead and put the screw in. So now we can remove the carburetor from the air filter holder. There's 4 screws. And from this angle you can see that there's a plastic piece on the main intake boot. Kind of holds its shape. Make sure you don't lose that piece. Alright, we have separated the intake boot from the carburetor. Inspect that boot. Sometimes they're torn, and that's the whole reason something won't start, because it's just sucking air. Won't pull any fuel in. These boots look like they're in good shape though. So I want to pull this adapter piece off the front of the carburetor so I can easily pull the cover off the top of it. Take a good look at the throttle linkage there. So you put it back together the right way. And then we'll dig into this just like we would any other carburetor. So we have a single screw holding the pump plate in place, and that diaphragm looks really stretched. Our micro screen, I don't know. It looks okay. There's no dirt in it. Maybe there's a little bit of scum on it. I don't think so though. But we're going to put a new one in. Let's take a look at the metering diaphragm. Seems like it's always the metering diaphragm, right? So this one is, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it. You can see how it holds its shape when I push it one way. It just stays there. And it was kind of clicking a little bit too. That's not good. It's supposed to return to center. It's supposed to just be a neutral position diaphragm. And if it gets moved one way and holds that way, well, that's not going to work, is it? So we're going to put a new micro screen in here. And, you know, you can find any tool you want to push it into place. Turns out that hex bit is just the right size for this one. So here's our new fuel pump. Get it oriented properly. And we need a fuel pump gasket. Looks right. And we'll screw this down into place. Alright, let's take a look at the other side. This is the metering lever and the needle. We're going to replace those parts. I probably won't replace the metering lever. If the tip of it where the diaphragm touches, if that's not worn at all, I just use the same lever. Usually it's set to the right height already. So we've loosened the screw that the crossbar that holds the metering lever in place. We loosened the screw for that one. Everything comes popping out of there, which is fine. Here's our old needle. We'll reinstall a spring. We'll put the cross shaft in the metering lever and hang a needle on it. Drop it down into place, slide the shaft over underneath the screw, and then tighten it down. So once it's tightened down, we want to check the metering lever height. And on this carburetor, the metering lever height is flush with the sides of the carburetor. So what I'll do is I'm going to take this razor blade, just a straight edge, and when I lay it across the carb, it should just be touching that metering lever. And if it's not, then just bend it and make it touch them so it's flush. Then we'll put our gasket and our diaphragm down. Then there's a spacer and another gasket. Now these two gaskets, they might be different. The holes in them one might have one extra hole in it. So make sure that you look at that before you just start slapping gaskets on there. Look at them go. Alright, we're taking our old fuel line off and we're going to put a fresh one on. We're going to come back to that scene. So now we're going to hook our linkage in, and there's a gasket that goes between this throttle plate and the carburetor body. Make sure you get the holes all lined up properly and set it in place before you run the screws in there. Looks like everything's lined up. Screw it down. So that's it. Our carb is done. That's all we're going to do to it. So now we got to put the intake boot onto the carburetor. Yeah, we get them screws in there. Tuck that one piece underneath that piece of linkage. Install this pulse line for the fuel pump. Looks good. Now we got to bolt it to the air filter holder. Nothing special here, but there is a rubber gasket between the air filter holder and the carburetor. Looks like we got it torqued down pretty decent. And then we want to hang our throttle linkage off the carburetor, because you can't get that on there once the carb is in place. So first I'm pushing the main fuel line on the carburetor. Then I'm dropping the throttle linkage down and it snaps into place on the trigger linkage. And finally, I'm going to put the fuel line on the back of the purge bulb. This is kind of the biggest pain in the butt part of this job. And later you'll see where maybe I didn't do this right. But I also want to point out that that choke lever right there has to drop into that slot on the blue lever itself. Once you get this flange lined up, you want to go back and check that that choke lever's in place. So what we're doing is we're kind of getting the flange close. We're dropping the screw into the top of the flange. But you can't just bolt it in like this because the bottom of the flange isn't in that cup that we pointed out earlier. Usually I got to take a screwdriver and kind of hold the bottom of that flange into that cup. And then you can, a lot of times, push the flange down a little bit and then run the screw in. That's it. At this point, you'd want to double check that choke linkage and make sure that it's proper. Yeah, the choke looks like it's working well. Now we're going to put these nuts back in here. And if you look at the nuts really close, you'll see that there's more meat on one side of the hole than the other. And the narrow end goes in first. Alright, this cover is going to go down into place. You got to clear the primer bulb. Get the screws run down tight. And then pull that air boot up and drop it into place. There's one hole and one little kind of pin in that rubber boot that drops into that hole to align it. Now our air filter, air filter holder, I guess. 2 screws hold this into place. And then our air filter cover. Let's get some fuel in here and see what it'll do. Let's go. We want to hear it go vroom. We're going to prime it up now. We're still trying to prime it up now. It's not priming up now. This is a problem. Still not priming up. I mean, it shouldn't take more than 6 to 10 pumps on that bulb to get some fuel moving. So let's tear this thing apart and see where we screwed up. And this has actually happened to me before. I don't know why I didn't think of this. But there is, well, you remember this scene back here where I put a new fuel line on it? It looks like it's almost the same length line, but it's just a little bit long. And because it's a little bit longer, it ended up with a kink in it. And now it won't pull fuel because there's a kink in that line. Right now it's pulling fuel because that carb tray is kind of lifted up out of place and the kink is not in the line. And I can't see a kink right now because it's not all pushed down together. So eventually I have to shorten that fuel line in order for it to pull fuel. So we'll try this again, and if it starts, then that's all I got for you on the K770 that supposedly didn't have spark. Thanks for watching. Later.